I know many of you will be watching this on Christmas Day, and you'll be in the festive spirit, but when you think about it, you're just another day closer to death. Speaking of death, one of the most well-known seasonal works of fiction is A Christmas Carol. It tells the story of Ebenezer Scrooge, a cold-hearted industrialist. On Christmas Eve 1843, he is paid a visit by the ghost of his business partner Jacob. Jacob was just as greedy and cold-hearted, and so, on his death, was condemned to forever walk the earth as a tormented ghost. Not wanting this fate for his friend, he arranges for 3 spirits to visit Scrooge and attempt to scare him into changing his ways. The ghosts of Christmas past, present, and yet to come. The brilliance of this story towers above others, but it's not the only Christmas ghost story written by Charles Dickens. It's just that his others achieve less fame. In Victorian times, telling ghost stories was a Christmas tradition as strong as any other. A tradition now largely forgotten, but I say we bring it back, starting now. Sir Charles Eggleston was a respected English writer who specialised in local history. In 1901 he published an account of a haunting said to take place near his home every Christmas Eve. The story concerns a highwayman who once terrorised any wealthy traveller to cross his path on a dark night. One Christmas Eve long ago, he stopped a moving coach on a remote stretch of road. 2 men and a young girl were inside it, and now afraid for their lives. At gunpoint he demanded they get out. The girl stepped out first, but as soon as she did the horse bolted, carrying her companions away. Now concerned only with her safety, they jumped out of the moving carriage and ran back. On reaching the scene they found the highwayman lying in a pool of blood. He was dead, and the girl was not in sight. But by following a trail of blood they found her hiding in the woods, clutching a bloody knife. After years of losing friends and family members to highwaymen, and now having been held up herself, she was driven mad. The girl thrust the knife into her own neck on being found by them, and died almost immediately. It was a tragic night, but just the beginning of the story. Every year since, the ghosts of both who died have returned on Christmas Eve to repeat the events in ghostly fashion, and so local villagers warn their children to stay inside on Christmas Eve. Among the greatest writers behind Victorian ghost stories was Algernon Blackwood. Our next story is his masterpiece. It tells the story of a young law clerk going away for Christmas. Having spent the last year defending murderers, he was eager for a break. With his boss, he had just defended a man accused of killing a woman and cutting her body into pieces. He had earned a winter trip to the Alps and borrowed a kit bag from his boss for the journey. The bag was old and dirty, but when back home he used it to pack his clothes. As he filled the bag, he began to hear the sound of footsteps getting closer and closer, but he was alone in the house. Fearing an intruder, he searched the house from top to bottom, finding no one. When he finally returned to his bedroom, the bag seemed to have fallen over, the material now forming the shape of a human face. It looked, remarkably, like John Turk, the man accused of murder. This was a face he'd rather forget, so he continued packing. Hours later, he again heard the sound of footsteps, this time even closer than before. By this time it was night, and he was in bed. In the darkness, the curiosity he had previously felt was now fright, yet he found the courage to again investigate. Slowly opening the bedroom door, he immediately noticed a strange figure standing at the staircase. It looked human, but dark and shadowy. In panic, he closed the door and hid behind it. Several minutes passed before he was able to leave the room and confront who or what was in his home. But when he opened the door again, the figure was gone. Something very unusual was happening, and further investigation was needed. But the lights were not working, and he was forced to light a match to inspect his home. Moving quickly to avoid the match burning out, he rushed downstairs, where in the living room he found the kit bag, but he had left the bag upstairs. There was no reason for it to be in the living room, unless someone had moved it. He approached the bag and bent over to pick it up, when suddenly the match burned out, leaving him in the dark. His panic-stricken hands struggled to find a new match and strike it. By the time he did, he saw that the shadowy figure was back. Standing before him, it was bending over to pick up the kit bag, just as he was seconds ago. The clerk now felt dazed and dizzy, as if intoxicated, and at that moment he realized that he had seen the bag before today. It was the bag shown at the trial. The one John Turk was accused of storing his victim's body parts inside. What had seemed like dirt covering the inside of it was actually blood, and now, amid his night of horror, it was in his home. Before being able to even process this, the second match burned out, but this time he passed out with it. It was 2 days later he awoke. He found himself lying in a hospital bed. In confusion, he wondered if the whole thing had just been a dream. Hopefully it was. But when a colleague came to visit him hours later, this hope was lost. The colleague explained he had been found unconscious in his home days before, and couldn't be awoken. He explained that the clerk had been given a kit bag belonging to the murderer John Turk by mistake, and on the night he fell unconscious, John Turk commits suicide by consuming poison. Turk left a suicide note in his jail cell, admitting to the crime and requesting that his remains be dealt with as his victims were, cut into pieces and stored in the kit bag. Just a few centuries ago, telling ghost stories really was a Christmas tradition, and no one knows why. Its origins are a complete mystery, but for some reason it caught on. By the 1800s, the tradition showed itself in print media. Whereas most Christmas ghost stories up until then were tied to local legends, writers would now just completely invent tales, sometimes pretending their creation was an old urban legend. By the mid-Victorian age, writers would create Christmas ghost stories over the summer to be released in winter. Successful stories could make a lot of money, but the most well-known of all only lost money. Thanks to the high cost of printing, A Christmas Carol brought Charles Dickens only £230, which in today's money is over £20,000, but the story was popular enough to be plagiarized countless times, causing Dickens to lose far more money in legal battles. Still, the tradition lived on into the 20th century, leaving us with too many scary stories to count. Perhaps the most scary is the story of Rudolph, a magical reindeer with a bright red nose. No doubt its nose is made red by the blood of his enemies. Never has such a bloodthirsty creature existed. For whatever reason, the tradition faded going into the 1900s, and within a few generations has been pretty much forgotten. There have since been attempts to bring it back. In the 1970s, the BBC produced a short film every year in a series called A Ghost Story for Christmas. It did little to revive the practice. Maybe it will never be revived, but that's what the terrorists want. So if you're looking for another Christmas ghost story, I recommend The Festival by H.P. Lovecraft.
Look well, Ebenezer Scrooge, for only you can see me.
What you want with me?
Much.
Oh, yeah.
In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley.
In life? Why do you trouble me?
It is required of everyone that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. My spirit never walked beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hall. So I cannot rest. I cannot stay. I cannot linger anywhere.
You are fettered. Why?
I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it link by link. Would you know the weight and length of the coil you bear yourself?
Speak words of comfort to me, Jacob Marley. Speak words of comfort.
Comfort? I have none to give. I am here to warn you, to save you if that be possible.
To warn. To save me. From what?
From such a fate as mine, to wander through the world and witness what I cannot share, but might have shared on earth and turn to happiness.